From the moment we first step onto a kindergarten playground, society kind of starts drilling this very specific virtue into our heads.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we are constantly told to be open-minded.
Right. We are taught to be forgiving. And, well, above all, we're instructed to be tolerant. I mean, it is framed as the ultimate hallmark of emotional maturity.
Yeah, taking the high road is what good people do.
Yeah, exactly. But what if that exact virtue, the one we pride ourselves on at dinner parties and in workplace conflicts, is actually just a socially acceptable camouflage for enabling toxic behavior? Welcome to today's deep dive.
It is great to be here.
If you are listening to this, you likely consider yourself a reasonable, accommodating person. Well, today's mission is to shatter that comfort zone. We are examining a highly provocative essay that challenges you to completely reevaluate where the boundary lies between being a genuinely good person and functioning as a human doormat.
Yeah, we are dissecting a text by an author named Feng titled Tolerance Equals Complicity. And honestly, it is a genuinely uncomfortable read in the best possible way.
It really is.
Because the author takes this universally praised concept of infinite patience and just turns it completely inside out, he is forcing a deeply unsettling question about at what precise moment your willingness to turn a blind eye stops being a moral victory and starts becoming a free pass for someone else to act terribly.
Okay, let's unpack this because the author doesn't kick off this philosophical journey from like a mountaintop. He starts it in a place we all know far too well.
A thoroughly unbearable group chat.
Exactly. The inciting incident that sparks this entire essay is the author aggressively hitting the leave group button on 3 different WeChat groups in just utter disgust.
Right. He hits a psychological breaking point over a very specific user roaming those groups, a person who goes by the moniker Lunatic Wang.
And Lunatic Wang is not merely having an off day or, expressing a controversial opinion. He is flooding the chat with constant vile cursing.
It was intense.
Yeah, he's throwing around phrases like "fuck your mother" and spouting language so filthy and vulgar. The author describes it as historically unprecedented in its nastiness. So the author leaves. But the true source of his outrage wasn't actually Lunatic Wang himself, was it?
What's fascinating here is where Feng places the ultimate blame. Because yes, he was repulsed by Wang, certainly, but he was absolutely horrified by the audience.
The people just watching it happen.
Right. Keep in mind the specific context of these WeChat groups. They were dedicated to spiritual cultivation.
Right, right.
So the members considered themselves enlightened, mindful individuals on a journey toward higher truth. And how did this enlightened audience react to a man flooding their space with unparalleled vulgarity? They praised him.
Oh, wow. They praised him.
Yeah, they were practically falling over themselves to call him superior and address him as a master. They framed his unhinged hostility as some sort of advanced, eccentric genius, praising his supposed knowledge and wisdom.
It's that classic trope where people mistake aggressive boundary breaking for, profound authenticity.
Exactly. They were actively tolerating his feigned madness. And this specific dynamic is where Feng's core thesis crystallizes.
Okay.
When bad actors step into a public space and realize that the crowd will not only tolerate their barbaric behavior but actually bend over backward to accommodate it, they do not suddenly feel humbled and self-correct. They escalate.
They lean into it.
Right. The author argues that politely enduring this isn't a sign of spiritual enlightenment. It is the pure, unfiltered acceptance of evil. By allowing this individual to speak unscrupulously without consequence, the audience is literally inviting moral degeneration to occupy the platform.
I mean, think of modern internet troll culture or even a workplace bully. It's like feeding a stray cat that keeps sneaking into your house and violently scratching you.
That is a great way to look at it.
You keep putting the little bowl of milk out on the porch because you desperately want to view yourself as a good, tolerant neighbor. But the cat comes in, tears up your living room, leaves you bleeding.
Yeah, and the author is making the brutal point that by refusing to kick that aggressive cat out of your house, you are not a saint. You are directly, materially responsible for the shredded furniture.
Your desire to be nice makes you complicit in the destruction.
That analogy gets right to the mechanics of the situation. The audience in that chat group provided the social oxygen that allowed the fire of Wang's toxicity to consume the entire space.
Right.
And from this highly specific digital conflict, the author zooms out to fundamentally redefine what the concept of tolerance actually means in the natural world. He introduces a framework we can call the same attribute theory.
I actually found this section surprisingly poetic. He argues that true tolerance is biologically and logically restricted only to differences within the same categories.
Yes.
Like if two things share the same fundamental attribute, they can and functionally must tolerate each other to survive.
He leans on botanical examples to make this complex philosophical concept incredibly tangible. Under the broad attribute of flowers, a soft peony must tolerate a thorny rose.
They're both flowers.
Exactly. A chrysanthemum has to tolerate the winter plum blooming in the freezing cold. A bougainvillea that blooms year-round has to peacefully coexist with an epiphyllum that only opens its petals for a few fleeting hours.
Right.
They possess radically different characteristics, life cycles, and appearances, but they share the exact same fundamental nature. They are all flowers contributing to a garden.
And then he immediately maps that botanical logic onto human values. Concepts like truth, kindness, beauty, love, faith, and sincerity all possess different textures, but they must tolerate each other because they belong to the attribute of goodness.
That is the crucial link.
And here's the massive structural pivot of the essay. When two forces are completely different in their absolute fundamental nature, coexistence is impossible. Fire cannot compromise and tolerate water. The blazing sun cannot tolerate the pitch-black darkness.
A pristine natural environment cannot tolerate industrial garbage. Following that logic, truth and human goodness cannot tolerate falsehoods and cruelty. When society tries to artificially force fundamentally opposing attributes to coexist in the name of being open-minded, that is the exact moment tolerance metastasizes into complicity.
Which leads us to the most visceral, unignorable metaphor in the entire essay. Here's where it gets really interesting. Xu Feng asks the reader to visualize a dinner table.
Oh boy, here we go.
Imagine sitting down to 8 incredibly delicious, beautifully prepared dishes. The ambiance is perfect. And then someone casually walks out of the kitchen and places a steaming plate of feces right in the dead center of the table.
It is such an aggressive mental image.
It is, and he looks at the reader and asks, point blank, "May I ask, will you tolerate it?"
It just strips away every ounce of the pretentious intellectualizing we usually apply to conflict resolution.
Completely.
Faced with that scenario, you wouldn't stroke your chin and say, well, let's respect the lived experience and presence of the feces on the table.
You would demand it be removed immediately.
Right, because its mere presence inherently corrupts the food, the environment, and the health of everyone sitting there.
I do have to jump in and push back on this on behalf of you, the listener, because it is incredibly easy, biologically speaking, for all of us to unanimously agree not to eat feces.
Sure, that's a hardwired survival instinct.
Exactly. But when we transition into complex human relationships, isn't the dividing line between a weed and a flower highly subjective? Who gets to wear the crown and decide what constitutes darkness and what constitutes light?
That is the big question.
If I have a coworker who is incredibly abrasive and rude, but he drives record sales for the company, is he the thorny rose I just need to tolerate, or is he the plate of feces ruining the entire office culture?
That tension you are highlighting is the central friction of the essay. Xu Feng operates from a framework that is entirely absolute. He deliberately starves his philosophy of gray areas.
He really does.
He is arguing against modern moral relativism, suggesting that humans actually do possess an innate universal understanding of the difference between a slightly thorny rose and literal systemic poison. But, he argues, we have been profoundly conditioned by our culture to pretend we don't know the difference.
So we just feign ignorance to avoid the discomfort of confrontation.
Exactly. And that leads directly into his systemic diagnosis of where this terrible conditioning originates.
Right. He doesn't just chalk this up to general human cowardice. He takes direct aim at deep-rooted cultural philosophies. Specifically, he critiques traditional Chinese values heavily influenced by ancient traditions like Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism.
And he points out that these philosophies have historically framed the act of bearing shame and humiliation not as a tragic necessity, but as a noble, elevated virtue.
Now, it's important we pause here for a second. We are strictly impartially reporting the author's view.
Yes, absolutely.
For you listening, we're not endorsing or validating this critique of Chinese culture or these religious philosophies. We're just exploring how the author believes that an intense cultural emphasis on patience can inadvertently breed societal dysfunction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he points to a very specific, widely known proverb to illustrate the bedrock of this cultural mindset. If you are patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 days of sorrow.
On its face, that sounds like brilliant, pragmatic advice for de-escalating a tense situation.
It does. In a tight-knit agrarian society where communal harmony is required for basic survival, that proverb makes perfect sense. If you disrupt the village peace, everyone suffers.
Right. But Kuifeng analyzes the psychological toll of applying that proverb as a blanket rule in complex modern life.
He argues that this constant, unrelenting demand to play the gentleman, to always yield, to always step back, doesn't actually manifest genuine peace. It creates a deeply repressed society.
People live awkwardly.
Exactly. They feel legitimate, righteous anger at injustice, but they are conditioned to physically swallow it. They dare not speak up, they dare not resist, and the psychological pressure cooker just builds because they have no culturally sanctioned outlet to vent this suppressed frustration.
And the ultimate tragedy, according to the author, isn't just the quiet internal suffering of the decent people. It's the macro-level consequence of all that silence.
Yes.
Because the general public is expending all their energy swallowing their anger to maintain this facade of a tolerant mentality. A massive vacuum of accountability is created. Ruffians, rule breakers, and toxic personalities are radically emboldened.
They realize quickly that they won't face any meaningful friction.
Right. They can act boldly, selfishly, and arbitrarily, precisely because they know everyone around them is too culturally polite to stop them.
And to illustrate the mechanical alternative to this dynamic, the author abruptly shifts from abstract philosophy to very concrete, highly physical examples of societal zero tolerance.
He wants to demonstrate exactly what it looks like when a community simply refuses to swallow its anger over bad behavior.
The contrast he paints is jarring. He recounts his own experience living abroad in Zimbabwe for over a decade.
This part was fascinating.
Yeah, he observed that in the areas he frequented, places like shuttle bus stops or crowded queues to pay utility bills, the act of queue jumping, like someone just cutting the line, was practically non-existent.
And it wasn't because of heavy police presence, right?
Not at all. It was because the public themselves had absolute zero tolerance for the behavior. He details a specific incident while waiting in line to pay a bill. A man attempted to bypass the queue and cut directly to the front.
And according to his account, the reaction was instantaneous.
Several elderly white women at the back of the line didn't just quietly grumble or look away. They immediately and loudly protested.
They actually stepped out of line, didn't they?
One of the women physically stepped out of line, approached the man, and dragged him back to the end of the queue. The author's analytical takeaway here is that order wasn't maintained by the goodness of the individual's heart, but strictly through the threat of zero public tolerance.
Because the collective crowd absolutely refused to accommodate the selfish behavior, the behavior was starved of the oxygen it needed to survive. He then pivots to Canada to offer an even more extreme example, this time focusing on institutional zero tolerance.
This anecdote is wild.
It really is. He details the cascading consequences faced by a sitting Canadian mayor who physically slapped a subordinate during an altercation. In many political environments around the world, an executive slapping a staff member might trigger a quiet internal investigation.
Maybe a financial settlement.
Or a forced resignation, framed as spending more time with family. But the mechanics of the Canadian response in his example are entirely different. The subordinate immediately called the police.
And law enforcement arrived, placed the sitting mayor in handcuffs, and removed him from the premises. He spent the night in a detention cell completely devoid of comforts.
The one knows no bed.
Not even a urinal. And the institutional hammer kept swinging. The following morning, the mayor was handcuffed again, fitted with ankle restraints, and loaded into an armored prison transport vehicle for his court appearance.
An armored car. For a sitting mayor. Treated like a high-risk flight threat.
The presiding judge immediately ordered a mandatory psychiatric evaluation to determine if latent mental instability was driving the violence. A 200-meter restraining order was slapped on him.
And he obviously had to resign his office. But the final court mandate is the most intense part.
Oh, yeah.
He was permanently banned from carrying any weapons for the rest of his life, and for an entire year, he was legally obligated to report his daily movements to a community crime prevention agency every single month.
By highlighting this specific sequence of events, Shuifeng is illustrating the crucial concept of proportionality in societal defense.
Right.
In a highly tolerant society, which is how he views his own cultural background, the public might shrug off a mayor slapping a subordinate as a minor lapse in judgment. But the Canadian system he describes operates on a different logic. It reacts to a single slap with an overwhelming, uncompromising, massively disproportionate display of systemic force.
It functions exactly like a biological immune system. The author is suggesting that a massively aggressive immune response to what seems like a minor infection, a single slap in an office, or one guy cutting a bus line, is the exact mechanism that prevents a total systemic collapse.
That biological analogy captures his intent perfectly.
If your white blood cells look at an invading bacteria and say, oh, it's just one little microbe, let's be tolerant and open-minded about its presence, the infection spreads and the entire body dies.
Exactly. The immune system doesn't negotiate with pathogens. And this brings us directly down to the micro-level interactions we all navigate on a daily basis.
Because Zufeng isn't just concerned with disgraced mayors and public bus stops.
No, he is taking aim at the everyday, mundane complicity that forms the bedrock of a decaying society. He calls out the irrational, no-bottom-line connivance we witness constantly.
Like the grandparents who gently coax and bribe a child, throwing a massive tantrum on the supermarket floor instead of firmly instructing them.
Or the school principals and teachers who deliberately look the other way when bullies terrorize a classroom because they don't want to deal with the administrative paperwork.
It's the husbands and wives trapped in deeply toxic, verbally abusive marital disputes who just keep tolerating each other for decades instead of doing the brutal work of fixing the root rot or leaving.
Right. He maps a direct causal line from those grandparents pacifying a tantrum to violent crimes eventually running rampant in the streets. It's the broken windows theory applied to human empathy.
Wow.
Over time, as a society becomes increasingly tolerant of minor moral infractions, it hollows out its own core, creating a massive ethical vacuum that major crimes inevitably fill.
So if infinite tolerance is the disease, what is his proposed cure? He actually goes out and implements one.
Yes, the essay boldly transitions from theoretical critique to practical application. The author introduces us to the new oasis for life, an intentional community established by an organization called Lifechanyuan.
And if you thought the Canadian judicial system was strict, wait until we look at the foundational architecture of the oasis.
This is a community engineered from the ground up on the principle of absolute, uncompromising zero tolerance for any behavior categorized as a negative attribute.
The author claims, quite proudly, that the residents behave with incredible nobility and the entire community functions in perfect, frictionless order.
And the mechanism for this piece, they simply never ever tolerate bad words or deeds.
Let's look at the specific guardrails they use because the granularity is intense. There is zero tolerance for fighting or swearing. That's standard community guidelines.
Sure.
Zero tolerance for boozing, whoring, gambling, or smoking. Extremely strict, but you find similar rules in various religious enclaves. But then the surveillance of behavior goes much deeper.
Oh, it really does.
Zero tolerance for hiding public goods privately. Zero tolerance for peeping into others' privacy. Zero tolerance for sexual harassment. Zero tolerance for what they call indolence and covet enjoyment, which essentially means zero tolerance for being lazy, entitled, or greedy.
And then we reach the most striking detail of the entire social experiment, the rule that truly tests the absolute limits of his philosophy. There is zero tolerance for wasting food or property.
This part blew my mind.
The author states unequivocally, no individual is allowed to leave any food in their bowl. The threshold is microscopic. If a resident leaves even a few grains of rice in their bowl after a meal, they have violated the core rules of the community.
Wait, literally a few grains of rice.
Literally, and the enforcement mechanism is rigid. Anyone who violates these rules receives exactly one warning. If the act is repeated, they are immediately and unconditionally expelled from their home and the community.
Just expelled. Over a few grains of rice.
This raises an important question about how peace is actually maintained in this oasis.
Right, because I have to jump in here. We have to ask, does zero tolerance at that molecular level actually create a utopian society? Or does it just create a terrifying psychological pressure cooker?
That is the natural response.
For a lot of listeners, the idea of living under the constant looming threat of losing your home because you didn't scrape the last 3 grains of rice from your plate sounds less like a peaceful green oasis and a whole lot more like an authoritarian boot camp. Where is the room for simple human error?
Well, that discomfort you are feeling is the exact friction the author deliberately wants to generate. He is aggressively pushing back against a global culture that he believes has become fatally lenient, so he swings the pendulum entirely to the opposite extreme.
He doesn't leave any room for negotiation.
Right. His underlying argument is that the only reason the oasis remains orderly and noble is precisely because of that unwavering draconian threat of expulsion. The psychological mechanism relies on the elimination of gray areas. The environment stays pristine because the garbage is immediately identified and thrown out without hesitation or debate.
We have covered massive philosophical ground today. We started in the toxic trenches of a WeChat group dealing with lunatic Wang.
Yeah, that was a journey.
We explored the botanical logic of why lovely flowers shouldn't have to politely tolerate feces on a dinner table. We examined the cultural critiques of swallowing our anger, analyzed the societal immune system through armored prison cars for slapping mayors, and finally arrived at a hyper-strict intentional community where a stray grain of rice can get you permanently exiled.
And through synthesizing all of these wildly different scenarios, the author's overarching thesis remains rock solid, even when his applications become extreme.
Exactly.
The core mechanical takeaway is this: giving bad behavior a free pass does not elevate you to sainthood. It demotes you to a participant. Your polite tolerance is the exact fertilizer required for someone else's toxicity to grow.
There is a brilliant mic drop quote near the end of the text that perfectly encapsulates this. Feng mentions an encounter where someone tried to high-mindedly lecture him, telling him, "You need to be more tolerant and accept everything."
And his response was perfect.
His immediate, visceral reply was, "I am not a trash can or a trash pit. How can I tolerate and accept everything?"
It is a phenomenal reframing of how we view our own emotional capacity. We are constantly taught to be open vessels.
Right?
But the harsh reality of fluid dynamics is that if you leave the lid off a vessel in a public space, eventually people will start throwing their garbage into it.
So what does this all mean? We promised you at the very beginning of this deep dive that we would challenge you to reevaluate where you draw the boundary line. Think about the landscape of your own life right now. Look at your workplace dynamics, your family group chats, or your romantic relationships.
Ask yourself where you are actively swallowing your own righteous anger.
Right. What is something deeply unpleasant that you've been tolerating for months or years under the comforting guise of being a good, easygoing person? Just to maintain a superficial peace that doesn't actually exist beneath the surface. And here is something we haven't touched on yet. A final thought for you to carry into your week. If you woke up tomorrow and suddenly decided to permanently close the lid on your vessel, if you suddenly stopped being the tolerant one and started strictly enforcing your boundaries, who in your life would be the most angry with you?
Oh, that is a great question.
Think about that. Because usually the people who are the most fiercely upset by your sudden lack of tolerance are the exact ones who are relying on it to get away with their bad behavior.
So true.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you find yourself making polite excuses for someone else's toxicity, remember the dinner table. Stop accepting the feces on the table. We'll see you next time.